And for more information on the American Rescue Plan, check this out here. We talked about this last show. Because, you know, last Sunday was Easter, so we did our Easter broadcast. If you missed that, you missed it. Go back and watch that one. Easter origins, pagan traditions, rabbits laying chicken eggs, and black people in the Exodus. Oh, go watch that broadcast that we dealt with. That was 3 hours. We got deep into the history. You know, I've talked about this document here before because I like to deal with facts and evidence. Proper documentation ends all conversation. So when people ask, how have the policies of the Biden-Harris administration helped the African-American community? I point them to this. Last updated February 27, 2023. They have a new one that came out February 2024 that streamlined. It's like 9 pages. This is a 36-page document that takes you through policy by policy to show you how the policies of the Biden-Harris administration are helping the African-American community. Republicans overwhelmingly are against these policies and voted against them, the ones that passed the House and the Senate. Fact sheet, the Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunities for Black Americans and communities communities across the country. But they talk about the American Rescue Plan in here. I talk about lowering energy costs and creating economic opportunities through the Inflation Reduction Act. They go through and talk about the American Rescue Plan, economic opportunity for Black families and communities by signing into law the historic American Rescue Plan, the ARP, bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act, and implementing robust regulatory reform. Biden has led the most equitable economic recovery on record, creating more than 12 million jobs. It's now 15 million jobs, a net 5 million jobs. African Americans, as of February 2024, got 2.6 million of the 15 million jobs. I want to go to American Rescue Plan, making critical investments in Black families and communities in the American Rescue Plan. Historic expansion of the child tax credit, cutting child poverty to record lows for Black children. Now, that we know that expired, but you can get that back. It has to pass the House and the Senate. I doubt if it passes this House of Representatives controlled by Republicans. There has been some talk about that, but they can't even get a budget passed. But this is one of the reasons why Democrats, and I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I sure as hell ain't stupid. I can see whose policies overwhelmingly are more beneficial for African Americans, and I can see who overwhelmingly keeps voting against our own interests. Overwhelmingly is Republicans at the federal level that overwhelmingly keep voting against our own interests. To understand all this, you have to understand history, economics, law, and politics. Help. History, economics, law, and politics. Historic expansion of the child tax credit, cutting child poverty to record lows for Black children. The American Rescue Plan provided cash relief directly to low and middle income Americans and cut Black child poverty more than half in 2021. Okay, read the rest of that. Supporting child care providers and reducing child care costs for Black families. The American Rescue Plan provided a $39 billion lifeline to help child care providers stay open and compensate early childhood educators as they provide safe and healthy environments for children and help parents work. States have already delivered American Rescue Plan stabilization grants to more than 200,000 child care providers, 1 in 5 of whom are Black, serving as many as 9.5 million children and their families. Okay, read the rest of that. Helping Black Americans stay in their homes. The American Rescue Plan helped Americans, including African Americans, stay in their homes by providing emergency rental assistance. Over 8 million households were served by emergency rental assistance. As of June 2022, African Americans were the largest group that received help, representing more than 41% of aid recipients. Representing more than 41% of aid recipients. Why didn't Candace Owens talk about how the American Rescue Plan helped Black people stay in their homes? And nobody pushed back on this. I don't understand things like this. Why didn't she talk about this? She says she's voting for Trump in 2024. What? She criticized the coronavirus packages, the stimulus packages. Why didn't she talk about how she says she's for the black community? Why didn't she talk about how this is help keep black people in their homes? Extending a lifeline to struggling small businesses and expanding access to capital. I'll read the rest of this here. This is a 36-page document. Because when Simple Simons on social media put this disinformation out like this, I hit them back with facts and evidence. I don't argue with stupid ass people. I don't do that. This is allergy season. I'm allergic to BS. I don't argue with stupid ass people. I don't do that. I just hit them with facts and evidence, let them go read this. Now you come back and talk to me when you've read this. And then some people say things like, now I dealt with this when I did my presentation for the Detroit Reparations Task Force here in Detroit, March 2nd, 2024. And we have that presentation streaming here on our network, dealing with the case for municipal reparations. And you have some people say, oh, well, we were on race specific programs. We only wrote programs for black people. Race specific programs are illegal at the federal level. And a lot of states, like the state of California, have laws that ban race specific programs, which is why their recommendations for reparations that came from the California Reparations Task Force, that's why it's based upon lineage as opposed to race, because that's illegal. Now, at the federal level, it's illegal also. That's based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination federally assisted programs. Okay, so some people may ask, well, how do you know this? Well, because I was involved in writing public policy here for the city of Detroit, and that's how I learned it. It was executive order under the Kwame Kilpatrick administration. I didn't work for the administration. I didn't get indicted or anything like that. But at our first meeting, it was Executive Order 22. In our first meeting, corporate counsel, Sharon McPhail, told us it's illegal to have policies that are only for one race of people or only for African Americans. She said, but what we can do is we can craft policy that disproportionately helps African Americans. Okay, so that's what we did. So I talked about this in my presentation because we unfortunately don't understand history, don't understand law, which makes us susceptible to these black social media disinformation agents that you hear me talk about. Okay, the podcast pimps and the social media whores out here putting out this misinformation and don't back it up with facts and evidence. And they say they want race specific policies, but don't cite this and don't tell you why it's illegal. Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination federally assisted program, Section 601. Go to archives.gov, which is the U.S. National Archives. Search for the 1964 Civil Rights Act and read it. You can read the whole thing there for yourself. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So you can write policies that disproportionately positively impact African Americans, but you cannot write policies that are only for one race of people, period. Now, you have some people who say, and I talked about this in my presentation, you have some people who say, oh, well, the Asians got a hate crime bill. Okay, and this is like one of the first, this is like a reflex from like reparations reactionaries. And this is a reflex from them. Oh, the Asians got a hate crime bill. Did you actually read the bill? Because the bill dealt with data collecting. The bill, number one, dealt with data collecting. Number two, is not called the Asian Hate Crime Bill. It's called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And the bill applies to people regardless of race or ethnicity. Just so people understand. So where do you go to read bills that pass the House that come from the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, whether they pass or not? Where do you go to read these bills? Congress.gov. I went and read the bill. And the bill deals with increased funding for data collecting. And when you read the bill, it tells you it applies to anybody regardless of race or ethnicity. It's not specific to Asian Americans. Now, it was inspired by hate crime. It was inspired by Hate Crimes Act and the spa killings of like 9 Asian Americans. Okay. But you go read this bill. This applies to anybody. And it deals with COVID-19 related hate crimes acts, COVID-19 related hate crimes bills. Because Donald Trump was calling coronavirus Kung Flu, K-U-N-G, like Kung Fu, and the China virus. So there was an increase in hate crimes toward Asian Americans, especially those perceived as being Chinese. But this didn't make it a federal hate crime to kill Asian Americans. This dealt with funding, better funding, data collecting of COVID-19 related hate crimes, and also paying for language translators, because if your first language is not English, language barriers become one of the obstacles to getting hate crimes reported. So that's what this bill was doing. But the first Hate Crimes Act in the history of this country was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson as part of the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And that was largely for African Americans. That was part of the modern day civil rights movement. And that was signed shortly after Dr. King's assassinated. Then those same people somehow forget the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. I don't understand how they do that, but there was the first anti-lynching bill passed in 122 years. First anti-lynching bill passed in the history of this country since Representative George Henry White proposed an anti-lynching bill in 1900. And he was he was an African-American Republican from North Carolina. And this is after they got wiped out of the House of Representatives and out of the U.S. Senate. Okay. So the first Hate Crimes Act in the history of this country was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Then in 2009, you had the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act. James Byrd was the African-American man who was killed in Jasper, Texas, dragged behind a pickup truck. Go read this. This is from justice.gov, U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009. Now, this is after the first Hate Crimes Act in the history of this country, which was signed into law in 1968 by President Johnson. Okay, now, I want to go to okay, so we dealt with that regulation. When I hear people like Candace Owens say Trump was better for the economy, that's why they're going to vote for Trump again. People have a short memory. Do you remember that there were 3 government shutdowns in the first 2 years of the Trump administration? 3 government shutdowns in the first 2 years of the Trump administration. That last government shutdown in December 2018, January 2019 was the most devastating. Let's look at this here. Before we look at that, once again, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Also, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App. $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills. Because like I said, I'm the one that does the research here. Okay. I don't have all these people that work for me and all these corporations and all that behind me. And I don't have none of that. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I just paid the bill for the hosting of the website also. Okay. That's what I paid bills this weekend. Paid for the website, paid Constant Contact their money so we can send the email blasts out. Yeah, I paid a number of bills this weekend. All right. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Scroll down the page. We have a Cash App information, $ the AHN show. And when you go to it, it'll say Michael, show my picture there. These are some fake African History Network Cash App accounts. You can click right here on the link, and it takes you to our QR code as well. And we have our link for PayPal also, paypal.me/the AHN show. But register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Our next class is Saturday, April 13th, April 20th, April 27th, and May 4th. Okay. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Classes on sale $60. It's $130 value. Content is PG-13. You can use this with your children. We also have the class lesson plan here for all 10 plus classes. You can download the class lesson plan and see the type of content that we cover. All right. Okay, let's continue here. Now, and let's post this here. And give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Share this information on your social media platforms. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and on YouTube, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. All right, barely treading water while the shutdown disproportionately affects Black Americans. Now, this deals with the last government shutdown. That was the most severe. And these are just articles from my files. Articles I have bookmarked, things like this. And some of these we've talked about before here on the show. Oh, you know, before we go to that, there was another one dealing here with the so-called Asian hate crime bill I wanted to show you all. This is from the Washington Post. Because I can listen to people, what they say, and tell what they haven't read. So when I hear people talk about the so-called Asian hate crime bill, I can tell they haven't read it. Washington Post by Paul Kane, April 22nd, 2021. Bill to combat hate crimes against Asian Americans passed the Senate with bipartisan support. Okay, then it was signed into law by Biden. Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii was one of the sponsors of the bill, if I remember correctly. If we go through, look at this here. Senator Josh Hawley, the Republican from Missouri, who gave a fist up to the insurrectionists January 6th, he voted against the bill. Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii, introduced the bill last month, officially titled the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. The COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, not the Asian hate crime bill, based on a year's worth of rising attacks after the pandemic began in Wuhan, China. 5 days after Hirono, Senator Mazie Hirono introduced the legislation, 8 people were killed, including 6 Asian women, in mass shootings at 3 Atlanta spas. The crimes heightened the pressure on Congress to respond to the rise in attacks against the Asian American community. I cannot tell you how important the bill is to the AAPI community, who often has felt very visible, who has felt very visible in our country, always seen as the other. And for them to experience that kind of hatred against them, Hirono told reporters after the legislation passed. Okay. So go read, expedite all. With Representative Grace Ming, Democrat, New York, as the lead House sponsor of the House in the House of Representatives, the legislation would assign an official in the Justice Department to review and expedite all reports of hate crimes related to the coronavirus, expand support for local and state law enforcement agencies responding to these hate crimes, and issue guidance on mitigating the use of racially discriminatory language to describe the pandemic. Okay, that's what it did. Once again, like I said, this bill applies to anybody. It's not specific based upon race. And it doesn't make it a federal hate crime to kill Asian Americans either, as some people mistakenly believed. Republicans at first hesitated to adopt a position on the legislation, which carefully avoids mention of former President Donald Trump's comments about the Kung flu and China virus as possible inspiration for attacks on Asian Americans, but the inference is easily understood. In a rare bipartisan compromise, negotiators agreed to add a broader bill, the No Hate Act, sponsored by Senators Richard Blumenthal and Jerry Moran, to provide federal funding to conduct broader studies about the number of hate crimes each year. Okay, read the rest of this article here. Bill to combat hate crimes against Asian Americans passed the Senate with bipartisan support. All right, now, I want to go to this one here. This is from National Public Radio, NPR.org. Barely treading water. Now, this dealt with the third of the 3 government shutdowns that happened during the first 2 years of the Trump administration. So when people say Trump was better for the economy, I'm trying to figure out what exactly they're talking about. Because he, as we showed you, he inherited a fairly healthy economy, robust economy from the Obama-Biden administration. He squandered it when COVID hit, and he left office with a negative job creation of 2.5 million jobs. The last president to do that was Herbert Hoover in 1932. That was during the Great Depression. He says he doesn't want to, Trump says he doesn't want to be another Herbert Hoover. He is Herbert Hoover. He's Herbert Hoover 2.0. Barely treading water while the shutdown disproportionately affects Black Americans. January 14th, 2019. This is by Ari Shapiro, NPR.org, National Public Radio. As the government shutdown enters its 4th week, becoming the longest in United States history, federal workers around the country are struggling to make ends meet. Now, African Americans make up 18% of federal workers. We're disproportionately represented in federal workers because the federal government, they were the first ones to implement affirmative action. Okay, to give people a fair shot at getting these jobs. But according to JMILES, Jamil Larty, a reporter with TheGuardian.com, the shutdown is having a disproportionate effect on African American workers and their families. African Americans make up a higher percentage of federal workers than they do of the non-government workforce. That's in part because for generations, government work has provided good wages and job security to African Americans who face more overt discrimination in the private sector. So when you talk about putting incompetent people in charge of the government, whether it's in the House of Representatives, whether it's in the U.S. Senate, or whether it's in the executive branch of the federal government, you're increasing the chance of government shutdowns, which disproportionately harm African Americans. Ari Shapiro of the National Public Radio's All Things Considered sat down with Larty to talk about some of the ways this disparity is playing out right now. Okay, so they talk about, so this is the interview here, and I have some things highlighted here on page 4. Could you explain the history that led to our situation today where African Americans make up a higher percentage of the federal workforce than they do the private sector? Okay, James, Jamil Larty said the federal government obviously has its own untoward history of racial discrimination, from underwriting redlining. Redlining goes back to 1937, coming from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, underwriting redlining and federal mortgage programming and excluding African Americans from New Deal programming. A lot of the New Deal programs discriminated against African Americans, even though some we were able to get some assistance from, but we were discriminated against as well from those, especially like the GI Bill in 1944, 1945. But it also has been the institutional vanguard of the nation's slow march towards equality, more so than the private sector at large and more than most state and local governments. In 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802 that I talked about on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, March 5th, because it was A. Philip Randolph who led the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It was A. Philip Randolph who threatened to put 100,000 African Americans marching on Washington if President Roosevelt did not sign an executive order to desegregate the Department of Defense jobs for African Americans. Okay, so this was June 1941. This was when America was part of what's called the Arsenal of Democracy, the Arsenal of Democracy, and the U.S. was making military weapons and military equipment and vehicles for the Allied forces. This is before the U.S. actively gets involved in fighting in World War II, because of which starts with the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So this is June 1941. All right. So this article talks about how they give the credit to President Roosevelt, but no, he was pushed by A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. This is why Executive Order 8802 was signed. It wasn't out of the benevolence of President Roosevelt's heart, but he was a white man who could be pushed to do the right thing. Just like President Lyndon Johnson was a white man from Tennessee, a segregationist from Tennessee, who could be pushed to do the right thing. Okay. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is one who largely can't be pushed to do the right thing. In 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, which banned racial discrimination in the Department of Defense industry. And that's largely seen as the most important move in support of the civil rights of African Americans from Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. From Reconstruction all the way to 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was passed. The federal government, for fairly obvious reasons, just did a better job of abiding by the Civil Rights Act than the labor market at large. Okay. So he goes on to say, we know that black families have a fraction of the wealth of white families, according to the Census Bureau. And now we know under the Biden-Harris administration, African-American household wealth has increased by 60%. Okay. Now that's not enough. It needs to increase by more, but it's going in the right direction. It just needs to accelerate and move faster. But you wanted to increase by 60%. You don't want it to decrease by 60%. You want it to increase, but it has to accelerate. It has to go faster. We know that black families have a fraction of the wealth of white families, according to the Census Bureau. For every $100 in white family wealth, black families have just over $5. Now, this was back in 2021. So back in 2018, 2019. So what does that mean when black government workers start missing a paycheck? The answer: the profound racial wealth gap in the U.S. makes it far more difficult for the average Black American to sustain a long period without a paycheck as compared to white Americans. Then you have Black women's equal pay day and how it takes the average African American woman 20 months to make the same amount of money that the average white man makes in 12 months. And African American women over their working lifetime lose about $1 million in lost earnings. Black Enterprise has an article on that dealing with Black women's equal pay day, which you talked about a number of times here on the show. I got that article somewhere. Okay. We should note that the disparity in wealth is probably much less acute among federal workers. We don't have numbers of Black federal workers' wealth versus white federal workers' wealth. It's probably much closer than the broader disparity, but overall, Black Americans are less likely to have friends, family, networks, access to credit, you name it. Things that will help you survive a period without a paycheck, they're less likely to have it, okay? Now, if we fast forward through this and go through one I had highlighted. This deals with the gender divide. Tell me about the gender divide here. Women make up 60% of the federal workforce, higher than the percentage they make up of the general population. What's the significance of that gender divide on African American families? So the answer: African Americans are about 10.5% of the civilian labor force, but 18.4% of federal employees. 18.4% of federal employees. According to data from the Office of Personnel Management, the share of federal workers who are African American women is roughly twice as high in the federal government as it is in the greater civilian workforce. This won't be new to anyone who studies race in America or is cognizant of how it works, but is going to disproportionately affect African American women. Okay, read the rest of this article here. Barely treading water: why the shutdown disproportionately affects Black Americans. This is from NPR.org, National Public Radio. This is dealing with the third government shutdown during the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all these articles. I'm just looking at, see what I want to cover. There was a piece from thegrio.com on this also. Now, Black Enterprise, dealing with Black Women's Equal Pay Day. This deals with how the average African American woman loses out over $1 million in their careers thanks to the wage gap. So this is real money. Okay, this is blackenterprise.com. This is from October 17th, 2019, a piece by Justin Barton. Let's go to this here. All right. Black women lose out over $1 million in their careers. Black women lose out over $1 million in their careers thanks to the wage gap. This is from blackenterprise.com, October 17th, 2019, by Justin Barton. Let me close out some of these tabs here. We'll come to some of your comments here in just a second. So you post your comments here. We'll come to some of your comments here in just a minute. Let's see. A black woman will lose out on $946,000 over a 40-year career if she continues to make 61 cents on the dollar that every white man earns due to the wage gap. Analysis by the National Women's Law Center shows, quote, assuming she and her white non-Hispanic male counterpart begin work at age 20, a black woman will have to work until she is 86 years old to catch up to what a white non-Hispanic man has been paid by age 60. Okay, an African-American woman has to work until she's age 86 to catch up to what a white non-Hispanic man has been paid by the age of 60. The National Women's Law Center found that African-American women face even larger pay disparities in certain states. In the state of Louisiana, black women were paid on average 47 cents for every dollar their white non-Hispanic male counterparts make, which is the worst state for black women's wage equality back at the time in 2019 when this article came out. Probably hasn't changed a whole lot, maybe improving some, but 2019. There's a significant racial wealth gap in America, and black women's wage certainly plays a role in it, said Emily Martin, Vice President for Education and Workplace Justice. For many black women, the cost of the long time wage gap comes close to $1 million. And in some states, it's more. It's time for the U.S. Senate to follow the lead of the House and pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. Women and their families literally can't wait any longer. Okay, so read the rest of this here. They talk about student loan debt. Now, we know that student loan debt continues to be discharged. So this article came out under the Trump administration. We know student loan debt continues to be discharged under the Biden-Harris administration. So far, $144 billion for about 3.9 million people has been discharged. It would have been more, but Donald Trump's 6-3 conservative Supreme Court struck down the executive order that President Biden did on student loan forgiveness. This is another reason why the courts are so important, especially the Supreme Court and federal courts. These are lifetime appointments. This is why this is so important. This piece here from thegrio.com, experts state that the shutdown has deeply affected black families. Now, this is from thegrio.com. Also, there was one from, I think this is one from NBCnews.com as well. This was, or CNBC.com. Black women make nearly $1 million less than white men during their careers. Now, this is from August 3rd, 2021. I'm just looking at articles that I have bookmarked, because I have thousands of articles bookmarked because of the type of research that I do. Black women make nearly $1 million less than white men during their careers. This is from August 3rd, 2021. Okay. Shannon Epperson for CNBC.com. So they talk about August 3rd was Black Women's Equal Pay Day in 2021. It marks the additional 214 days black women must work to catch up with white non-Hispanic men, catch up with what they earned the previous year. In essence, black women have to work 579 days to make what white men do in 365 days. Okay. So they talk about the pay disparity, and for full-time working black women, this amounts to a median wage gap of $2,900 a month, $24,110 a year, and $964,400 over a 40-year career. Research shows black women face a persistent pay gap, including in jobs that have been essential during the pandemic. Black women who work in areas that are critical to the COVID-19 recovery, such as doctors, nurses, teachers, childcare workers, wait staff, and cashiers, for example, make 11% to 27% less than white men, according to data from the Economic Policy Institute. In higher paid professions, including among doctors on the front lines fighting COVID, the inequality is magnified. White male physicians and surgeons make $63.41 an hour on average. African-American women in these positions make less than $46.59 an hour, the Economic Policy Institute found. Okay, read the rest of this piece here also. Black women make nearly $1 million less than white men during their careers. All right, now there was, when we look at the cost of the government shutdown, the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan government entity, found that it cost the U.S. economy $11 billion. This is incompetence, okay? This is just an example of the incompetence of Donald Trump mishandling the economy when he was in office. So all these people who think Donald Trump was some type of economic genius, now this is the same guy who is found liable for fraud in the state of New York for over assessing the value of properties, and has to pay a $450 million settlement. Okay. And he can't sit on the board. He can't run a business in the state of New York for the next 3 years. But somehow this same genius is qualified to run the federal government and qualified to run a government of 330 million people. You can't make this stuff up. Government shutdown cost U.S. economy $11 billion, CBO says. Now, this is from the New York Times, January 18th, 2019. Alan Rappaport and Benjamin Applebaum. The 5-week federal government shutdown took a significant economic toll, costing the United States economy $11 billion, with nearly a quarter of that total permanently lost, the Congressional Budget Office said on Monday. The figures are the first official projection of the economic effects of the longest federal shutdown in history. Donald Trump made history. The longest federal shutdown in history, and they show that its cost was nearly double the $5.7 billion request from President Donald Trump for a border wall that fueled the impasse. That is enough to reduce first quarter growth by 0.4 percentage points. Okay, read the rest of this. So this incompetence from specifically Donald Trump and the Trump administration cost the U.S. economy $11 billion. And you had the longest government shutdown in history under this financial genius. You can't make this stuff up. I don't know why anybody didn't bring this up on a Breakfast Club interview. I don't understand things like that. And that's corporate radio. Usually, you know, you can't just put out like misinformation like that. You know, there's going to be somebody there that, you know, fact checks, you know, provide some evidence, nothing. TheGrio.com, January 16, 2019. Experts state that the shutdown has deeply affected Black families. Experts state that the shutdown has deeply affected Black families. While Americans have felt the financial hit from the shutdown, no community has felt the economic sting more than African Americans. So I'm still trying to figure out how Candace Owens is going to say everybody was doing better under Trump, and therefore she's going to vote for Donald Trump in 2024. I don't understand things like that. Experts state that the shutdown has deeply affected Black families. While all Americans have felt the financial hit from the shutdown, no community has felt the economic sting more than African Americans. Almost a month in, the damage is not only taking place on the economy, but is also affecting many African-American federal workers and their families. Now, this is a piece from Brianna Rhodes for TheGrio.com, January 6, 2019. Okay. The nation is in the midst of the longest running government shutdown in U.S. history. According to BusinessInsider.com, 800,000 federal employees and millions of government contractors are currently going without pay. After a month in, the damage is not only taking place on the national economy, but it's also affecting African-American workers, African-American federal workers and their families. So they cite the piece from NPR.org that I cited as well, Ari Shapiro and Jamil's Larty. So they talk about that piece here. Okay, so you can read the rest of this as well. The Business Insider also notes that the shutdown is not the only financial woe that America has to worry about. The U.S. is also dealing with the negative effect of the U.S.-China trade war, stock prices falling, a slowdown in international growth, and a conflict about the debt ceiling. All right, read the rest of this one here. But Donald Trump is supposed to be such a financial genius. Okay, now I had like 7, 8 articles on it, but we'll just deal with those. That's enough. All right. Let's look at some of the rest of this stuff here. So when you talk about Donald Trump is better for Black people, so for instance, people may point to, I don't know, they may point to something like the First Step Act, right? And they say, well, Donald Trump was, he did the First Step Act to release people from prison. Well, let's look at that. Do you know whose bill that was? The First Step Act? That wasn't Donald Trump's bill. That wasn't Donald Trump's idea. Donald Trump didn't run on the platform of releasing black people from prison. That bill was Representative Hakeem Jeffries' bill, the First Step Act. They tried to get it passed under Obama Biden. It was blocked in the Senate by Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, senator from Alabama, and Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. And the Congressional Black Caucus worked with the Trump administration to get the bill passed. Now, the champion of the bill inside the Trump administration was not Donald Trump. It was actually Jared Kushner. Okay? Senior aide to Donald Trump. And Jared Kushner, wasn't Jared Kushner supposed to bring peace to the Middle East also? I thought Jared Kushner brought peace to the Middle East. The reason why Jared Kushner was the champion inside the White House of the First Step Act, and it's like first step towards criminal justice reform under the Trump administration, is because Jared Kushner's father was sent to prison. And the person who sent Jared Kushner's father to prison was Chris Christie, when Chris Christie was a U.S. attorney. Then he became governor of New Jersey. Now, this is also why Chris Christie did not have a did not get a position in the Trump administration. He was on the Trump transition team, and he helped Trump prepare for debates with Hillary Clinton, but he was blocked from getting a position in the Trump administration by Jared Kushner because Chris Christie sent Jared Kushner's father to prison. Let's look at this piece here quickly from New York Times. Chris Christie says Jared Kushner's father committed a loathsome crime. Chris Christie said Jared Kushner's father committed a loathsome crime. January 30th, 2019. Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor who clashed with Jared Kushner during his brief stint running President Trump's transition team, issued a sharply personal attack on Jared Kushner's father on Tuesday, saying he committed a loathsome and disgusting crime. The former governor's new memoir, releasing this week, depicts Mr. Kushner, the president's son-in-law and advisor, as being hell-bent on retribution for Mr. Christie's prosecution of his father more than a decade ago, as being hell-bent on retribution for Mr. Christie's prosecution of his father more than a decade ago, when Chris Christie was a United States attorney. Chris Christie says Stephen K. Bannon, another white supremacist in the Trump administration, the former Trump strategist, and Stephen K. Bannon used to run Breitbart News. Breitbart was financed by another white supremacist named Robert Mercer, who's a billionaire hedge fund manager, who's anti-civil rights. Robert Mercer, who was one of the first billionaire backers of Donald Trump. Go research Robert Mercer. Chris Christie says Stephen K. Bannon, the former Trump strategist, told Mr. Kushner had directed his firing from the transition team, and he paints Kushner as a shadow campaign manager and chief of staff who offered questionable advice. Okay. Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, a multimillionaire real estate executive, pleaded guilty in 2004 to 18 counts of tax evasion. Pleaded guilty in 2004 of 18 counts of tax evasion, witness tampering, and making illegal campaign donations. Okay, some of this sounds similar to Donald Trump. Birds of a feather flock together. He admitted hiring a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, who was cooperating in a federal campaign finance investigation. Federal campaign finance investigation. Now, the trial that starts up April 25th in New York, prosecuted by DA Alvin Bragg, which is called a hush money prosecution, a hush money case, is actually federal election interference, because it deals with, is really a violation of campaign of federal campaign finance law. And what Trump was doing was falsifying business records to cover up a payment to Stormy Daniels through Michael Cohen in the tune of $130,000 to keep her quiet so that she would not reveal an affair she had with Donald Trump shortly before the 2020 election. And this was the news of this payment came out the day after the Access Hollywood tape was revealed, and Donald Trump was losing support among women. Okay, so this was designed to keep this quiet during the election so Trump wouldn't lose the election. And then he falsified the repayment of the loan as legal fees to Michael Cohen, when really it was to cover this up, to keep this from imploding his 2016 presidential campaign. So you're dealing with a violation of campaign of federal campaign finance law. All right. So Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, admitted hiring a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, who was cooperating in a federal campaign finance investigation, then videotaping the sexual encounter and sending it to the man's wife, Jared Kushner's sister. So this is why Jared Kushner's father went to prison, rightfully so. Who sent him to prison? Chris Christie. Read the rest of this here, just so you understand the background. So the person pushing for criminal justice reform in the White House wasn't Donald Trump. He wasn't the impetus of this. It was Jared Kushner. This is from the New York Times. Chris Christie says Jared Kushner's father committed a loathsome crime. Okay, now when we look at I was showing you this here because people like to talk about the First Step Act, but they don't say, well, who was behind that? Collins Jeffries' historic criminal justice reform bill signed into law. This is at jeffries.house.gov. Representative Hakeem Jeffries. This was his bill. Today, historic bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation, S765, was signed into law. The First Step Act of 2018 is based on the formerly incarcerated Reenter Society Transformed Safely Transitioning Every Person Act, First Step Act. That's what it stands for. It's an acronym. Formerly incarcerated Reenter Society Transformed Safely Transitioning Every Person Act, First Step Act. Co-authored by Representative Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, and Republican Congressman Doug Collins, that overwhelmingly passed the House of Representatives in May, May 2018. The legislation will propel formerly incarcerated individuals towards success when they return home, while enacting targeted reforms that would improve public safety and reduce recidivism. Its authority, it authorizes $375 million over 5 years to develop new programs, including education, vocational training, and mental health counseling. Consequently, newly released individuals will be positioned to successfully re-enter society. So when people talk about the First Step Act, why don't they give Representative Hakeem Jeffries the credit for this? Like I said, they were trying to get this passed under Obama-Biden, but it was blocked in the Senate by Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, who's against criminal justice reform and then became Trump's first attorney general, where he reversed criminal justice reform measures in the Department of Justice. And it was blocked by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. With respect to sentencing reform, the First Step Act will increase public safety and engineer much needed changes to draconian sentencing laws connected to the failed war on drugs. It modifies the 3 strikes law to make it more humane, increases judicial discretion to reduce sentences for low-level nonviolent drug offenders, and provides retroactive relief for thousands unjustly sentenced during the crack cocaine era. Representative Hakeem Jeffries said the First Step Act is a victory for all Americans who believe in justice and the power of redemption. This bill would transform lives by providing access to mental health counseling, education, job training, and substance abuse treatment needed to help incarcerated individuals get back on their feet and become productive members of society. It also provides retroactive relief for the shameful crack cocaine sentencing disparity that unfairly destroy lives, families, and communities. The First Step Act is not the end. The First Step Act is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It's simply the end of the beginning of a bipartisan journey to eradicate mass incarceration, the mass incarceration epidemic in America. Highlights of the bill include addressing crack cocaine sentencing disparity. Before the year 2010, those convicted for crack cocaine related issues received a sentence of 100 times harsher than that of those convicted of cocaine related offenses. The First Step Act of 2010 reduced that disparity to 18-1. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 under Barack Obama, under President Obama, the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 reduced that disparity to 18-1. The First Step Act makes that change retroactive, thereby reducing the sentences of thousands of individuals serving unduly heavy sentences. Okay, it curtails juvenile solitary confinement. Focus on dignity for women. Being pregnant while incarcerated can be a harrowing experience. There are far too few guarantees for the health and safety of both mother and baby, etc. Okay. Requirement to move people closer to home, etc. So read the rest of this. Reduce mandatory minimums. The bill reduces second strike mandatory minimums of 20 years to 15 years and reduces the third strike mandatory minimum of life in prison to reduces that to 25 years in prison. It also solves the 924C stacking problem by prohibiting the application of recidivist mandatory minimum enhancements for repeat offenders who commit certain firearms offenses to conduct within the same indictment. Okay. All right. So read the rest of this here. I don't have time to get through all of this. Collins Jeffries Historic Criminal Justice Reform Bill signed into law. This is at jeffries.house.gov. Representative Hakeem Jeffries, because this was his bill. Somehow he doesn't get credit for anything. If it's just, people just give credit to Donald Trump. Oh, he had criminal justice reform, all this stuff. And the one pushing for the criminal justice reform in the White House was largely Jared Kushner. Okay, now January 6, 2021. January 6th insurrection, I've talked about a number of times before, and how that is really a continuation of the violence that we saw the political violence we saw during the Reconstruction era that brought an end to Reconstruction, which collapses in 1877. See, all this history, you have to understand history. Your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. And when I listen to a lot of these people out here talking, I can tell they don't understand either one. They don't understand politics or history. A lot, especially the black social media disinformation agents. I can listen to them and tell they don't know what they're talking about. That's why they can't do a deep analysis like this and show you this type of information. If we look at, let's see, where do we want to start here? Let's look at this piece. Let's look at this piece here from Time Magazine, time.com, because this helps provide a framework for this discussion. And I teach classes dealing with the Civil War, Reconstruction, and history from 1800 to 1970, 1968, 1970. This piece here from Time Magazine deals with how the history of the Reconstruction era is not being taught in schools across the country. A new report finds that 45 states are failing to teach students about the period that shaped race relations after the Civil War. Now, the Civil War is 1861 to 1865, the U.S. Civil War. Okay. Now, some people may ask, well, that was a long time ago. What does that have to do with today? Okay. What does the U.S. Civil War have to do with today? And what does the Reconstruction era, 1865, 1877, have to do with today? I'm glad you asked that question. This is a piece by Olivia B. Waxman, January 12, 2022, history.com. In the aftermath of the insurrection a year ago, so they're talking about January 6, 2021, at the U.S. Capitol, many leading historians drew parallels between the violence that we saw January 6, 2021 and the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, the period of political revolution directly following the American Civil War. Eric Foner, who's one of the foremost authorities on the history of the Reconstruction era, historian Eric Foner, said the events we saw reminded me very much of the Reconstruction era and the overthrow of Reconstruction, which was often accompanied or accomplished, I should say, by violent assaults on elected officials, which was accomplished by violent assaults on elected officials. Eric Foner is the Pulitzer Prize winning historian and author of the book Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877. He said this in an interview with the New Yorker magazine published a week after the January 6, 2021 insurrection. Scholars say studying the aftermath of the Civil War can help put in context many of the most seminal events in the U.S. in recent years, from the brutal murder of George Floyd by police May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to the voter suppression laws enacted after African-American voters played a big role in helping Joe Biden and Kamala Harris be elected vice president and vice president in 2020. Because the January 6, 2021 insurrection was fueled by racial animus, especially directed to the voter results in the 2020 election in Detroit, where I live, Atlanta, Georgia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Cities, large major cities that have heavy African-American populations that voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And then on January 5th, 2021, we can't forget January 5th, 2021, you had the special Senate elections in Georgia, in the state of Georgia, with Senator Raphael Warnock, the African-American senator. Senator Raphael Warnock beat Kelly Loeffler. And Senator John Ossoff, the challenger, beat Senator David Perdue, the Republican. So those two election results gave Democrats a 50-50 slight majority in the Senate, with Vice President Kamala Harris being the tie-breaking vote if you have a tie in the vote in the Senate. And those two election results gave Democrats a majority, gave them control over the U.S. Senate. Okay? That election was the day before the January 6, 2021 insurrection. Now, they have been planning the insurrection prior to that. They've been promoting it come January 6th, because that was going to be the bicameral, both chambers, the House and the Senate, bicameral constitutionally mandated session of both chambers of the legislative branch of government to certify the 2020 election results. Okay, certify the 2020 presidential election results. Okay, so all this is building up to January 6th, but the day before January 6th, you have what happened in Georgia, which really infuriated white supremacists. But let's go back to this piece from the Time magazine. But despite the timeliness of the era, ERA, in today's climate, many students in American schools will not get a full education on Reconstruction until they go to college. But the majority of them are not going to go to college. So where are they going to learn from? In social studies standards for 45 out of 50 states and the District of Columbia, discussion on Reconstruction or the Reconstruction era is partial or non-existent. Is partial or non-existent according to historians who reviewed how that period of time is discussed in kindergarten through 12th grade social studies standards for public schools nationwide. In a report produced by the education nonprofit Zen Education Project, the study's authors say they are concerned that American children will grow up to be uninformed about a critical period of history that helps explain why full racial equality remains unfulfilled today. Okay, go read the rest of this article here. A new report finds that 45 states are failing to teach students about the period that shaped race relations after the Civil War. This is from Time magazine, January 12, 2022. Okay, now let's look at this quickly here. January 6, 2021 insurrection. And we're going to get out of here, because I've gone much longer than I intended to go, but I have so much information, and this is just a fraction of the information I even had laid out for this discussion. Okay, let's look at this here. I want to make sure I get those articles in. I want to look at this right here. This is from the Washington Post. 6 takeaways from the January 6 committee's first primetime hearing. Millions of people watched the January 6 congressional hearings, especially in prime time. 6 takeaways from the January 6 committee's first primetime hearing. This is analysis by Amber Phillips, June 10th, 2022, for the Washington Post. And let's see. Okay, number one, the committee holds Trump responsible for the attack. A lot of this I'm going to skip over. I wanted to go to, let's see. Okay. Number two, how the committee plans to tell its story. Let's see here. Number three, a sharp attack on Trump's Republican defenders. Number four, how Trump influenced the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. How Trump influenced the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. If the attack was not spontaneous, as the committee says it was not, what led to it? The committee alleges that right-wing extremist groups were motivated by Donald Trump himself. The committee spent a large chunk of Thursday's hearing introducing Americans to two of these groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and making the case of how Trump's statements and tweets influenced their actions and eventually their violence. Now, the Proud Boys are the ones that Donald Trump said during the debate with then candidate Joe Biden. He told him to stand back and stand by. Stand back and stand by. He didn't condemn the Proud Boys. He told them to stand back and stand by. The committee presented evidence that membership of the Proud Boys tripled after Trump praised the group in a presidential debate toward the end of the election campaign. The hearing also featured footage of rioters reading aloud over a bullhorn a tweet Trump sent attacking Vice President Mike Pence for his lack of courage. And when Trump tweeted ahead of January 6th, quote, "Be there, will be wild," end quote, the committee said that these extremist groups took it as a quote unquote call to arms, quote unquote call to arms. Filmmaker Nick Quested, who embedded with the Proud Boys that day, testified that some group members went to the Capitol early that morning. Others left the quote unquote Stop the Steal rally on the ellipse to march to the Capitol before Trump's speech even began. Then he said they did not seem very interested in hearing Trump speak, which Nick Quested said confused him at the time. But he described the group's atmosphere as, quote, much darker than usual. Okay, so read the rest of that. Then, so you have the racial animus toward African Americans voting for Biden and Harris. You had the attacks on Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss, the election workers in Georgia, in lies that both Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani told about them, saying they were involved in voter fraud and passing vials of flash drives like they were vials of cocaine. That's what Rudy Giuliani said about them. It was actually a ginger mint, if I remember correctly. It was a ginger mint they were passing. They were accused of voter fraud. These people show up to Ruby Freeman's house to terrorize her. All types of nonsense like this. This racial animus. Okay, so read this piece here from the Washington Post. 6 takeaways from the January 6th committee's first primetime hearing. This is from June 10th, 2022. And then there's another one I want to look at here that I was looking at. Hold on, I think there's one more article. Oh, this one right here. This is from PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System. How race played a role in the Capitol insurrection. This is June 11th, 2022. How race played a role. How race played a role in the Capitol insurrection, I should say. June 11th, 2022. Okay, and this was the January 6th committee will hold its next public hearing on Monday morning. And while the panel's focus is on former President Trump and his closest allies, future witnesses are expected to draw a link between between the Trump White House and extremist groups. Hakeem Jefferson, a political scientist at Stanford University, joins John Yang to discuss. Okay, so you can go through and read this full transcript. Okay, you can check this out. So you have the January 6th insurrection and the big lie, the lie that Donald Trump lost because the election was stolen. You have that feud about racial animus. Okay. But let's not forget about the attack on critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because this was largely led by Donald Trump, this attack. So people may ask, well, what do you mean by that? Okay. Let me show you. Hold on, let's see. Also, take a look at this piece here from NBCnews.com on January 6th, insurrection. January 6th response would have been vastly different if rioters were black, House Sergeant at Arms told investigators. January 6th response would have been vastly different if rioters were black, House Sergeant at Arms told investigators. William J. Walker, who was the head of the D.C. National Guard during the insurrection, also indicated that he thought more people in the crowd would have died if the mob had been largely black instead of overwhelmingly white. This is William J. Walker, testified before a Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee hearing in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd, 2021. So this piece is from December 28th, 2022. The House Sergeant at Arms, who was the head of the D.C. National Guard during the attack on the Capitol, told the January 6th committee that the law enforcement response would have looked much different had the rioters been black. He said, quote, I'm African-American, child of the 60s. I think it would have been a vastly different response if those were African Americans trying to breach the Capitol. William J. Walker told congressional investigators in an interview transcript released Tuesday, as a career law enforcement officer, part-time soldier, last 5 years full, but a law enforcement officer my entire career, the law enforcement response would have been different. His testimony echoed the observations of many Americans, including President Joe Biden, who noted the stark difference in the law enforcement response to protests in Washington following the May 2020 murder of George Floyd and the lax security at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. William J. Walker, the head of the D.C. National Guard during the insurrection, also indicated he thought more people in the crowd would have died if the mob had been largely black instead of overwhelmingly white. All right, so read the rest of this piece also. Okay, now I want to go to, what was I trying to get to? Hold on, let's go to, okay, we did that one. How race played a role in the Capitol insurrection. We did that one. And attack on critical race theory. That's what I was trying to think of. Okay, so this goes back to September 2020. It was a memo that Donald Trump did, this executive order, that Donald Trump did banning critical race theory when it came to professional development training and training in the federal government. There's a good article from NBCnews.com that goes through and shows you how this evolved. And I have a whole file dealing with critical race theory and the attacks on it. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. Republican lawmakers across the country have proposed bills to ban critical race theory in K through 12 schools. Here's what that really means. So let's look at this, okay? Because you have Candace Owens saying she's voting for Donald Trump in 2024 and how Donald Trump was good for the economy. He'll be good for black people, all of this stuff. She skips over all of this, okay? Trump largely was the one who unleashed the attack on critical race theory, even before Christopher Rufo, college dropout Christopher Rufo, conservative activist, ultra-conservative Christopher Rufo, put out his tweets about them redefining what critical race theory is. That was March 2021. Trump did this 6 months before that. And because of the big lie being pushed by Trump and Trump allies that the election was stolen, then we saw a rash of voter suppression bills coming out of state legislatures, starting with Georgia Senate Bill 201. Okay. And we've got one from Mother Jones. I've got to show you about that before we get out of here, because this is critical. And who was behind that bill? The entity behind that bill and other bills, other voter suppression bills being passed in these state legislatures, pushing this big lie. So this piece is from May 10th, 2021, right? It talks about right here, a cluster of bills that aim to prohibit teaching critical race theory in K-12 schools have popped up in the last year. They go and talk about Donald Trump 2020. Conservative leaders have been accused of using the decades-old academic term critical race theory, initially intended to recognize the systemic racism inherent in American life. They've been accused of using it as a catch-all for anti-racism and diversity efforts. A catch-all for anti-racism and diversity efforts. The proposed policies mimic former President Donald Trump's September 2020 memo ordering the Office of Management and Budget to stop funding training on critical race theory for federal employees, calling it a propaganda effort. This is what Donald Trump unleashed. Around that same time, Donald Trump condemned the 1619 Project, a Pulitzer Prize winning 2019 New York Times report led by reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones that holds that America was truly founded not in 1776, but 1619, when the first enslaved people were brought to the British colonies. Now, there's some problems with the 1619 Project. We dealt with that here on the show before. That doesn't mean to attack it or ban it or vilify it or something like that. Educators embraced this message from the 1619 Project and began utilizing the project and looking for resources to teach a more holistic history of the country. Donald Trump launched the 1776 Project or 1776 report. Donald Trump said, I don't know anything about the date 1619. The date I know about is 1776. Donald Trump rebuked the 1619 Project as a warped, distorted portrayal of American history. Both the memo that he did, September 2020, and this attack on the 1619 Project sparked the commission of the 1776 report, meant to combat the contents of the 1619 Project. The countrywide uprisings in the wake of George Floyd's death only fueled the matter, with pundits debating the nation's fraught history of racism. Thus, although President Joe Biden reversed Trump's initial ban in January 2021, the ban on critical race theory being taught to federal training, things like this. Trump reversed that ban. The seed had already been planted. Biden reversed Trump's ban. Also, Biden removed the 1776 report from whitehouse.gov, the official website of the White House, and Biden disbanded the 1776 commission also. All right, read the rest of this article here. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. This is at NBCnews.com. All right, now, I talked a minute ago about the voter suppression bills being pushed because of the big lie and being pushed by Donald Trump. This piece right here from motherjones.com, May 13th, 2021. This talks about who was behind these voter suppression bills. Leaked video. Dark money group brags about writing GOP voter suppression bills across the country. Quote, we did it quickly and we did it quietly, end quote, said the executive director of Heritage Action. Now, this is a good piece by Ari Berman, who used to write for thenation.com, because he wrote a series of articles dealing with voter suppression during the 2016 presidential election. Ari Berman and Nick Sergey for Mother Jones. Okay. And this article talks about how in a closed door meeting, a private meeting with big money donors, the head of a top conservative group boasted that her outfit had crafted the new voter suppression law in Georgia and was doing the same with similar bills for Republican state legislators across the country. Doing the same with similar bills for Republican state legislators across the country. Now, this is Jessica Anderson, who is the executive director of Heritage Action for America. She said in some cases we actually draft them for them, or we have a sentinel on our behalf give them the model legislation so it has that grassroots from the bottom up type of vibe, end quote. The Georgia law, Senate Bill 201, had 8 key provisions that Heritage Action for America recommended. Jessica Anderson, the executive director of Heritage Action for America, said. Now, this is the sister organization to the Heritage Foundation, the right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation. The 226 federal judges that Donald Trump got confirmed, they were largely suggested to him by lists that came from the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. These ultra-conservative right-wing judges, as well as Supreme Court nominations. Jessica Anderson said this at a private meeting to donors at an April 2022, April 22nd gathering in Tucson, Arizona, and a recording obtained by the Watchdog Group documented and shared with Mother Jones. Those bills included policies severely restricting mail ballot drop boxes, preventing election officials from sending absentee ballot request forms to voters, making it easier for partisan workers to monitor the polls, preventing the collection of mail ballots, and restricting the ability of counties to accept donations from nonprofit groups seeking to aid in election administration. All of these recommendations came straight from Heritage Action for America's list of best practices drafted in February. With Heritage help, Jessica Anderson said Georgia became, quote, the example for the rest of the country. So the article talks about how Georgia was the blueprint, and then all those bills that popped up in other state legislatures, Heritage Action for America, they were the ones behind crafting that legislation that was operating based upon the big lie. But this is designed to suppress the voting rights of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and those who are leaning towards voting Democratic. And there were 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, 16.9 million of them African Americans in 2020. So read the rest of this article, watch the video. Okay, so this is all behind that. And then you had the Heritage Foundation that in 1980, they put out a document, they put out a book, I should say. They put out a book of 2,000 policies that they wanted implemented by the Reagan administration. The name of the book is called Mandate for Leadership. Mandate for Leadership. The Reagan administration implemented 60% of those policies in the first term. if you go to, there's a lot of information on this, but it's a Mandate for Leadership is the name of the book. Now, Ali Velshi on MSNBC, Velshi, he did a really good segment on this. I think it was back in October 2022. You can look that up. But this is straight from heritage.org, the Heritage Foundation's website. Reagan and Heritage, a unique partnership, June 7, 2004. Reagan and Heritage, a unique partnership. And when we look at this here, let's zoom in on this. The partnership began in 1980 when Heritage, the Heritage Foundation, provided the president-elect's transition team with detailed policy prescriptions on everything from taxes and regulation to trade and national defense. The published version of these recommendations, the 1,100-page Mandate for Leadership, was described by United Press International back then as a blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels, New Deal going back to President Roosevelt, New Deal lapels, and shaking out 48 years of liberal policy. The new president, Ronald Reagan, used Mandate for Leadership to help realize his vision of a world free of communism, an economy that did not crush people's dreams with high taxes and regulations, and an America that would admire that, and an America the world could admire once again. So Reagan continued the reversal of policies beneficial for African Americans. The reversal that began under Richard Nixon, because you had Richard Nixon, then Nixon has to resign from office in August 1974. So then you have Gerald Ford that continues his term. Then you have Jimmy Carter, 76 to 80. Then Ronald Reagan comes in for 8 years. And then George H.W. Bush continues that Reagan-Bush era for another 4 years. He gave copies to every member of his cabinet, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan gave copies of Mandate for Leadership from the Heritage Foundation to every member of his cabinet. The result, nearly 2/3 of a mandate for leadership, nearly 2/3 of mandates for leadership, 2,000 policy recommendations were adopted or attempted by the Reagan administration. As conservative commentator William F. Buckley put it, the foundation, Heritage Foundation, had a great hour when Ronald Reagan was elected president and found waiting for him 3 volumes of heritage material designed to help him chart the nation's course in the right direction. 60% of the suggestions enjoined on the new president were acted upon, which is why Ronald Reagan's tenure was 60% successful. Read the rest of this. Now, this worked back in 1980. The Heritage Foundation is trying to run the same game if Donald Trump somehow wins in 2024. They're calling it Project 2025. Have you heard of Project 2025? August 29th, 2023. This is from the Associated Press. I'm waiting for this to load up. Conservative groups draw upon plan to dismantle the U.S. government and replace it with Trump's vision. This is from the Associated Press, August 29th, 2023. Conservative groups draw up plan to dismantle the U.S. government and replace it with Trump's vision. With more than a year to go before the 2024 election, a constellation of conservative organizations is preparing for a possible second White House term for Donald Trump, recruiting thousands of Americans to come to Washington on a mission to dismantle the federal government and replace it with a vision closer to his own, closer to Donald Trump's own. Led by the long-established Heritage Foundation think tank and fueled by former Trump administration officials, the far-reaching effort is essentially a government in waiting for the former president's return or any candidate who aligns with their ideas and can defeat President Joe Biden in 2024. With a nearly 1,000-page Project 2025 handbook and an army of Americans, the idea is to have the civic infrastructure in place on day one to commandeer, reshape, and do away with what Republicans deride as the deep state bureaucracy, in part by firing as many as 50,000 federal workers, in part by firing as many as 50,000 federal workers. Now, African Americans are 18.4% of federal workers. That the same people behind running game in 1980 with the Reagan administration and Mandate for Leadership, the 1,100-page book they put out, the Heritage Foundation is doing the same thing with Project 2025. Because people still haven't learned what happened. They're planning to do the same thing, just much worse. Paul Dans, D-A-N-S, director of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project and a former Trump administration official who speaks with historical flourish about the undertaking, said we need to flood the zone with conservatives. We need to flood the zone with conservatives. This is a clarion call to come to Washington, he said. People need to lay down their tools and step aside from their professional life and say, this is my lifetime movement to serve. They want Trump loyalists as federal employees. They want to purge the federal government of people who will not be loyal to Trump. They want to redo the Schedule F classification of federal employees. Jonathan Swan, before he left Axios.com, did some fantastic reporting on this. This is a piece from Axios, and some of this you're going to have to read through because I got to get the hell out of here. We've gone 3 hours. It's a lot longer than I thought, but I got so much information. This is just a fraction of the information that I have. How Trump could reimpose Schedule F in 2025. This is updated July 23rd, 2022. I think this is the one from Jonathan Swan. Is this the one from Jonathan Swan? I don't know. He wrote some articles dealing with this. Sources close to former President Trump say he would immediately reimpose his Schedule F executive order if he takes back the White House in 2024 presidential elections. In 2024 presidential elections, Axios' Jonathan Swan reports. Why it matters. It would effectively upend the modern civil service and put future presidents in the position of bringing in their own loyalists or reverting to a traditional bureaucracy, Jonathan Swan reports. Okay, so then they go through, give the backstory on Schedule F employees, all this. Read that. How Trump could reimpose Schedule F in 2025. There's an article that came out in the last couple of months. Trump allies prepare to infuse Christian nationalism in second administration. They're talking about white Christian nationalism. They're not talking about, love the poor, don't cheat on your wife. They're not talking about, how you treat those lesser than you, and taking care of children, taking care of the sick and elderly, taking care of immigrants. Don't cheat on your wife. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about those Christian values. Trump allies prepare to infuse Christian nationalism. It should say white Christian nationalism in second administration. Spearheading the effort is Russell Vought, V-O-U-G-H-T, president of the Center for Renewing America, part of a conservative consortium preparing for Trump's return to power. That's a picture of Russell right there. So if you see him again, you know who we're talking about. February 20th, 2024, Axios.com. An influential think tank close to Donald Trump is developing plans to infuse Christian nationalist ideas in his administration should the former president return to power, according to documents obtained by Politico. Spearheading the effort is Russell Vought, who served as Trump's director of Office of Management and Budget, okay? The OMB, Office of Management and Budget, during his first term and has remained close to him. Vought, who is frequently cited as a potential chief of staff in a second Trump White House, is president of the Center for Renewing America think tank, a leading group in a conservative consortium preparing for a second Trump term. Christian nationalists in America, or white Christian nationalists in America, believe that the country was founded as a Christian nation and that Christian values should be prioritized throughout government and public life. There's a separation of church and state. It wasn't founded on Christian values. The quote unquote founding fathers had a distinct separation between church and state. As the country has become less religious and more diverse, Russell Vought has embraced the idea that Christians are under assault and has spoken of policies he might pursue in response. Okay, read the rest of this. I don't have time to get through all this. Trump allies prepare to infuse Christian nationalism in second administration. This is from Politico.com. So I hear black people like phenotypically black, like Candace Owens, talking about supporting Donald Trump in 2024, and Trump is better for America. Everybody was doing well under Trump. Trump is better for Black America. I have absolutely no idea what the hell they're talking about. Lastly, I want to look at this piece here. Then we'll get out of here. What is this? Associated Press. A surge in wealth has boosted most U.S. households since 2020 and helped sustain economic growth. Because African-American household wealth on average has increased by 60%. Now it needs to increase more. It's not enough, but I'd rather have it increase by 60% than decrease by 60%. I'd rather have 15 million jobs created under Biden-Harris than lose 15 million jobs. In a net creation of 5 million jobs. I'd rather have that than lose 5 million net jobs. I'd rather have 15 million created than lose 15 million. A surge in wealth has boosted most U.S. households since 2020 and helped sustain economic growth. Associated Press, October 18th, 2023. The net worth of the typical U.S. household grew at the fastest pace in more than 3 decades, from 2020 through 2022, while relatively low interest rates at that time made it easier for households to pay their debts, according to the government report Wednesday. Now, we know interest rates increased to slow down inflation. The Fed didn't raise interest rates this last time around. It's expected in 2024, interest rates are going to fall. Wealth for the median household, the midpoint between the richest and poorest households, jumped 37%. Those 3 years, the Federal Reserve reported to nearly 193,000. And let's see here, talking about recession. The jump in wealth occurred even as the brief but brutal pandemic recession cost 20 million Americans their jobs. In 2020, extensive government relief aid totaling about $5 trillion helped spur a rapid recovery that regained the lost jobs much faster than had been true after the 2008-2009 recession. And let me see, where is... Household net worth rose more on a percentage basis for Black and Hispanic households than for white ones. Though measured in dollar terms, the disparities remain wide. The median net worth of Black households jumped 60%, but remained comparatively low at 45,000. So yeah, we wanted to increase the so median is the statistical measure, the point where 50% of the population is above the point, 50% is below the point. The median net worth of African American households increased by 60%. For Hispanics, the figure surged 47% to nearly 62,000. Among white households, median household net worth rose 31% to 285,000. So yes, we need more, but I'd rather have it increase by 60% than decrease by 60%. So we need to accelerate the growth, but continue the trend. All right. So that's going to wrap it up here. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for the online history classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. On Saturdays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We have classes April 13th, 20th, 27th, May 4th. Register for that. Download the lesson plan and support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior is not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us. Peace.